Hey everyone, I know I promised a new video and there is one coming, hopefully in the next day or two. It's just taking a little longer than I initially thought. So in the meantime, here's a re-upload of one of my old videos that, nobody really watched. Thanks. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for another episode of Randomated Thoughts, the show where I just kind of ramble on for a while about whatever's bouncing around my head.
I don't believe it! Empty as a poor man's wallet.
I'm Dr.Animaction, and today I'm thinking about all of the cartoons from the 80's and early 90's that centered around anthropomorphic animals. And we certainly had a lot of them. We had felines in the form of thundercats and later SWAT cats, fish in the form of tiger sharks and later street sharks, and we had aliens like the dinosaurs and biker mice from Mars, and even the mighty ducks. Not only that, but we had humans that could become animals, like the Visionaries, humans that rode into battle on animals, like the Dino Riders, and robots shaped like animals, like Voltron. Even the Transformers got in on the action with Beast Wars. Being an animation fan during the time was the next best thing to taking a zoology class. But in this big dog pile of shows... Wait, we didn't have any about dogs. That's weird. Anyway, out of all of them, there was one show that captured kids more than any of the others, creating a bigger mythology than the rest and remaining in the cultural consciousness longer than any of the competition.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, heroes in a half shell, turtle power.
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were a verifiable phenomenon when the cartoon hit in 1987. Over a 5-year period through 1992-ish, they were unavoidable. They had a cartoon, movies, toys, video games, a touring rock band, merchandise, food products. They were on every screen and product you could possibly slap a turtle on. And we kids loved it. I mean, I loved it. I have so many memories about the Turtles that stand out to me. I can clearly picture going to the first movie when it was in the theater, when I was 11 years old, and how mortified my mom was by Raphael's profanity about losing his sai. I remember going to Pizza Hut with my family just so I could get my hands on the coming out of their shells merch. I even recall pestering my mom at the grocery store to buy me the TMNT pudding pies. You know, the little Hostess ones. Yeah, I mean, it was just vanilla, but the pudding was dyed green, and it was in a Turtles wrapper. I even had a hot pink Turtles baseball hat that I actually wore. Hot pink. Although it was a Christmas present for my parents, so that one's not completely on me. So using myself as a representative example, you can see how popular the Turtles were with kids at the time. The question though is why? As I've already mentioned, plenty of their contemporaries also filled the anthropomorph role, with Thundercats even doing it 2 years earlier, not to mention all the Hanna-Barbera animals of the previous decades. So it wasn't by virtue of being turtles. It could have potentially been because they were ninjas, because, I mean, people think the 80's were all about ninjas, but I don't think that was it either. In fact, and this may be a randomated thought for another time, but I'd be willing to argue they were a huge part of the cause of this belief, rather than a result of it. So it probably wasn't the ninja thing either. Nope, when you get right down to it, I think they were as popular as they were because regardless of their status as both ninjas and turtles, they were us. They were kids. In that sense, TMNT ushered in a whole new approach to animated action shows. Although plenty of shows during that time featured kid characters, it was almost always the sidekicks. At best, they were secondary protagonists like the younger generation in Defenders of the Earth, and at worst, they were plot devices, like Tracker and Mask. There were the odd shows like Dungeons & Dragons or Mr. T, with kids as the majority of the cast, but they weren't the serious action shows that I like to talk about here. In most of the shows that I'll be covering, the best representation kids got was from characters like the Wily Kittens. Part of the team in name, but come on, not really. And on top of that, they rarely spoke or acted like kids at all. Their status as kids was just generally demonstrated by them inevitably screwing something up. The Turtles, though, they acted like kids. They talked like us, and played video games like us, and ate pizza like us. They represented kids of the time because they were created as stereotypes of kids of the time. I understand the inspiration for the characters came from a combination of Teenage Mutants and ninjas, But we got something better than just Teenage Mutant Ninjas. We got Mutant Ninja Teenagers. By overemphasizing everything kid-like about them, the Turtles ended up becoming characters that actually resonated with us. Skewing the age down from that target audience of the original profanity-laced comic book was probably the smartest thing the creators could have done when they made the animated series, because we all bought into it in a big way. It's also why they've managed to stay relevant until today, the epitome of perpetual children, with their attitudes and behaviors constantly evolving to match the predominant behaviors of kids in each subsequent era. Our 80s and 90s Turtles were goofy and fun-loving, becoming more serious and emotional with the live-action show in the late 90s. Then in the 2000s, we got new Turtles that were extreme and had a much harder edge to them. I mean, they didn't even have pupils in the 2000s, which is pretty extreme. And then in this past decade, they became digital and moved back towards some of the original series' goofiness, but also conscious of real issues. Throughout every version, though, they were still recognizable as the Turtles, but each audience related to them differently. Yet even with the modicum of that popularity still intact and a nearly continuous presence on TV since their inception, there will never be a generation more enthralled with the Turtles than us 80s kids were. So were the Turtles' action in the same vein as G.I. Joe and the Transformers? Not exactly, but kind of. They were close enough to deserve a place amongst the action of the time, but different enough to be the start of something new. The original series lasted from its start in '87 all the way through 1996. It ushered in the new era of the 90s style cartoons while still having its feet firmly planted in the 80s. Essentially, the Turtles were a hair metal band that remained popular through the grunge era and continued to reinvent itself over the decades since. But at its heart, the show was still built on all of those same ideals that fueled the more traditionally 80s action, and earns its place amongst them here on the channel. Anyway, those are my thoughts on why the Turtles became the phenomenon they were when I was a kid. Combine all that with how cool the toy line was and just how freaking extensive it grew to be, and you had a perfect 80s property. Honestly, every subsequent version of them has continued to appeal to me as well. Yes, even the Michael Bay movie versions, which I'll defend in an episode at some point. Oh wait, the latest version where they're all slapsticky and, let's be honest, kind of stupid. I can do without those. Not really a fan of the SpongeBobification process, but that's just my preference. If you guys like it, then great. Keeps the Ninja Turtles going as a property, and I'm all for anything that can do that. I'll leave off with one last memory of what's probably my fondest personal TMNT experience. I had a friend in high school who'd actually made a set of Ninja Turtle costumes out of duct tape and mattress foam. All things considered, they look pretty great, but they're still obviously made from duct tape and mattress foam. One day, a few of us threw on the costumes to walk around at a popular local event. I was the guide, seeing as I was too big for any of the costumes, and got to lead them around the event. Too big, like, tall, not too big, like, you know. It was insane. Little kids were super excited to see the Ninja Turtles walking around. They were running up to give high fives, parents were taking pictures. It was generally amazing and a lot of fun, and it really put into perspective just how much the Turtles meant. But on that note, I'll wrap this up. In terms of popularity and cultural impact, I'd say TMNT was the property that led the transition in decades from the 80s to 90s for a lot of us. What do all of you think about it? I'm definitely interested if anyone wants to talk about it below. As the big YouTube kids say, like, comment, subscribe, bell. I've been Dr.Animaction, and I hope all of you will stay tuned and stay tuned, as in cartoons, because animation. Thanks again for watching. Later.